Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dealing with Ambiguity as a PM. This is Shambhavi, and I'm very excited today to come and talk to you about my product management experience. And hope you guys are doing great and find this useful. So, what are we going to talk about today? So, we're going to talk about two things. So, firstly, I'll share about the different types of ambiguities a product manager faces. And so, as product managers, we are actually very obsessed with our customer journeys, right from the point they are ingressed into our experience to the actions they perform and how their journeys eventually end or are paused. However, we don't really talk or discuss a lot about a product manager journey, and which is very important, especially on how we move from chaos to clarity in a structured way. And in this presentation, that's one of the key things that I'll focus on. So a product manager starts right from understanding the customer pain point to narrowing down the right experience, getting the stakeholder buy-in, prioritizing, measuring and defining and measuring the right success metrics, and eventually execution. And throughout these stages, there are different types of ambiguities that a PM encounters. Which brings me to my second point, which is the frameworks, mechanisms, and tips that I'll be sharing with you that I've seen work in the 10 years of my product management experience, and which is the juice of the stock. So before we get started on this, a little bit about ambiguity. So ambiguity in general arises from more than one interpretation of something, and which happens mainly because of two reasons. One is that you have a superficial understanding of something, or the people involved are do not have the same knowledge. And and throughout this talk, you'll see me sharing with you some frameworks and mechanisms that try to address these 2 points. So one is, how do we move from superficial understanding to a more detailed understanding, which is reasonable enough to move forward? And how do we have all the members of the team and your stakeholders on the same page? Because if you don't have that, the ambiguity, the assumptions creep in, and they uh, don't result in the outcome that you're looking for. So let's get right into it. So before we get started, let me share a little bit about myself to give you some context on where I'm coming from. So I started my tech career with Infosys, where I worked as a software developer after completing my engineering from computer science. And in the second stage of my career, I pursued a master's in information systems from Carnegie Mellon. And there I got an opportunity to intern with AWS Marketplace team. And I interned as a software developer, but that was the first time that I got visibility into a product manager role, and how important it is for the business success. So when I graduated, I switched from a software developer to a product manager, and that's how my product manager journey started. So I worked for these three e-commerce companies. I started with Sears Holdings, which at one point was like one of the biggest US retail giants. As a senior product manager, I did a pilot launch for self-service kiosk, which was a great learning experience for me, because I was kind of thrown into this mix of software, hardware, and store environment, which was not a very traditional setup for a product manager who's just starting off. So that was great. And later I moved to the Softlines teams, where I launched some improvements that catered to the customers who were buying clothes. And after that, I moved to Home Depot, where I drove product recommendations to present the right product in front of the customer at the right time by understanding their intent and the current context. So some work with building recommendation systems, working with data scientists and engineering. And then at Groupon, I worked in their push marketing team where I was driving targeted messaging on different assets through push notifications, in-app messaging, site banners, and email banners. So after that, I moved to Amazon, which is where I'm today. I joined Amazon in 2017 in Amazon business team, where I launched features to help enterprise customers grow. So those features would help the business customers to set up their procurement policies, do their spend analysis, help them do their approval workflows. So that was the first phase of Amazon, and recently I joined Alexa team, which is pretty exciting. And this year, I also started to follow my passion for mentoring aspiring product managers. So I'm a mentor in two platforms. One is Advisor, and second one is Mentor Me Good, which I started working with a friend. So I do career discussions and resume reviews and mock interviews. And so that's pretty much about me. And so now let's get started on the main talk of this presentation. So starting with the first step of the PM journey, which is understanding the customer problem. And we'll see the types of types of ambiguities that happen here. But before that, let's talk a little bit about the types of customer needs. So depending on your company, your team, your product, you could encounter any of these one type of customer needs that you have to focus on. So the first one is the unmet needs of the existing customers who already use your product. So for example, you are a product manager of a school supply store, and the problem could be that maybe the customers are not able to find books of a specific subject or class. So that's the type one. The second type is the unmet needs of new customers that your product doesn't serve currently, but the customers hope that it does. So they are coming to you, but you're not serving those needs. So, for example, you have a beauty supply store, and the customers that are coming to you, they are looking for a DIY shampoo where they tell you the ingredients and they can buy those shampoos from you. So, and then the last one is the unmet needs of potential customers for which market doesn't have a good product yet. So those needs are still being met through some workaround or through a suboptimal product, but there is a need for a better product. So irrespective of these types of needs, as a product manager, you still have to make sure that you have clarity on what the customer really needs. And this may sound very simple, but it is one of the most critical things, because if you go wrong here, whatever happened next is kind of not useful at all. So let's look at why ambiguity exists here, right? So one of the main things that I've seen is assumptions. So PMs, people in your team, stakeholders, anyone, they just make assumptions. And that leads to ambiguity because you don't have the depth of understanding and there are a bunch of assumptions. Or you're using biased information, of course, not intentionally, but sometimes in consumer products, especially product managers, especially new product managers, they try to they unintentionally operate in a way where they think they are the users, which is not true. So you are not your user. So I think that is one reason. The third thing is sometimes we took users' wants as their needs, and which are two really different things. So, for example, I want to fly my car to work is a want. A customer could come and tell you that that's what I want to do, but that's not the need, because if you dig deeper, you'll find that really the need is that they want to shorten their commute time. They want to reach to work faster. So drilling down and not taking the first version of what your customers are saying that's what you should do, because otherwise there would be ambiguities and challenges. The fourth thing is that the PMs do not have metric instrumentations done to get the customer data. So, there would be a bunch of launches which do really address the pain point, or may not, but we don't really have a way to know until it's measured, and we got evidence. So I think doing that would help, because otherwise there will be that ambiguity on whether a particular feature really helped the customers or not. Um, or even to understand the customer need, if there is no data on the customer behavior, it will be really, really hard to understand what is going inside the customer's mind, and the implicit actions or the explicit information that they provide will not be useful. Then the fifth one here is on spending less time to move fast, which is pretty common actually. There is immense pressure on a product manager to really come up with a feature. The engineering team is waiting, the backlog needs to be done. And that is one of the reasons where you might be forced to spend less time on the problem space and just move on. And that would be problematic later. The last one here is complexity, and this could happen where maybe the customers have some complex, long workflows, and because you don't have understanding of it, there would be ambiguity. So we looked at like reasons of ambiguity, but how do we really disambiguate the customer need? So I'm proposing here a two-step framework. The first one, which I call is the step one, which I call is creating an ambiguity questionnaire. And this is simply one place where you list all your knowns, the known knowns and the known unknowns about what you know of the customer problem. You write your assumptions, your hypotheses, beliefs, suspicions, talk to your stakeholders, team, get that information, and really just have one place where you have all these things which you don't know for a fact, but these things needs to be validated. So once you have this ambiguity questionnaire, you move on to the next step, which is where you move from the questionnaire to the castle of clarity. And once you have the castle of clarity, you will be in a position to define the customer need in a very simple way without any distractions. So the first step that you do here is you try to ask yourself, knowing what you know about this need, could existing customers have shown any signs about it? And if so, then you dig for it. So you have your maybe WBRs, QBRs, or whatever methodology your company follows to track the key metrics. You look for some other metrics. You look at the voice of the customer, and you try to understand and validate like whatever was in your questionnaire, is it really true or not? And if that happens, and if all the questions are resolved, then you have reached the castle of clarity. If that's not the case, then you ask yourself if having a yes-no type of a response from a large representative sample of your customers would really resolve the ambiguity. So for example, let me share an example with you. When I was at Groupon, one of the pain points or one of the observations that we saw from data was that customers were buying a lot of Groupons, but they were not really redeeming it. And we didn't know what was the motivation of buying something when they were not planning on redeeming it. And so what I did was I did a quick survey. And I learned that there are some cases who customers who brought the Groupon but eventually decided not to use it. But there were significant customers who just forgot about it. So they were fully they had made up their mind to use it, but they forgot about it. And so I launched a feature called redemption reminders through push notifications, which really helped in the redemption rate. And this survey methodology really helped me to get that data. So in this case, That's what I did to resolve the ambiguity. But there would be cases where your existing data or the surveys are not helping. So in that case, it could be possible that there are multiple layers to the problem. You want to speak to the customers and have a detailed follow-up conversation, and that's what then should be done. So. And for that, you do a lot of customer interviews, which is also a very popular way of understanding customer pain points. So with this flow, you kind of have a structure where you know where to start. And a lot of times one methodology would not be enough. So here are my some tips. The first one being that do triangulate, because you may get some data from, let's say, your current metrics, but you have to go back and talk to the customer to really understand where exactly the pain point is. And so you do that. So you may have to follow multiple methodologies, and you may have to do multiple iterations, because you started with known knowns and known unknowns, and throughout this process of understanding from the data and the customers, you may find something that were unknown unknowns, right? So you didn't even know that you had to get data on it. So do the iterations, minimize the bias. So again, you're not your customer. Make sure that you have inputs from all customers. If this problem is global, make sure the voice of all marketplaces and locales are heard. And then the last one is balance the time. Do make it a time-bound activity. Do not overspend time here, because your goal is not really to be very, very precise, but to identify the pattern so that you can move on. So with that, we move to the next stage. So once you have the customer requirement clearly, you will think about what is the right user experience to solve for it. And for example, this is your customer requirement. So I want to order my grocery in an easy way when I run or about to run out of them. So the customer need should be very crisp, very clear, free of distractions. And once you have that, you will start on the user experience part. So before we look into the types of ambiguities over there, I want to give you an example of, I want to really throw some light on the user experience part of it, because a lot of times people think that user experience is something that's additional on top of the product, but really user experience is like at the core of the product. So with this example, let me show you an example of a user experience, right? So here there are some dash buttons. You may be already familiar with it. You basically have dash buttons for different types of grocery products. You bring it home, you attach it or install it where it is convenient for you, and then whenever you're about to run out of your groceries, you press on them and you'll get an Amazon delivery. So that's one sort of a user experience. And then this is another user experience, which is also solving that pain point along with other pain points. But really, you just ask that Alexa, order this, and you'll get it delivered to your doorsteps. So here, user experience actually played a very big part in your product, in the whole product itself. And this shows how different user experience can really transform your product. So think about user experience as something that is core of your product. So now let's talk about why ambiguity exists when defining the user experience. So the first thing is that there is absence of deep-rooted customer empathy. So you, again, tying back to that, you have an understanding of the customer need, but it might still be superficial. And if that is the case, then the user experience that you'll define will not be right. So that's one. The second thing is lack of input on feasibility. So generally, and a lot of companies have changed this, but generally, product was defining the experience and the engineering was coming much later. And if we do that, we lose on getting the feasibility inputs early on, which is really required here. So I think lack of input again on feasibility is one reason. And the second thing is, sorry, the last thing here is that we have a user experience defined. We did the customer validation also, but we really focused on the positives. We proved what we wanted to prove, but we missed on capturing the negatives of the experience. So these were the three reasons. And to define the right user experience, the framework that I want to suggest, again, has two steps. So the first thing is, yes, you define the user experience and there is a framework for that, and you do the customer validation. So when you're defining the user experience, I want to call out this framework called empathy map framework, which I've seen a lot of my partner UX designers use, and it's great because it captures customers feedback in a very holistic way. And here's why: because you really look at what they are feeling, what they are hearing, what they are seeing, what they're doing, what they're saying, and what are their pains and gains. So you're looking at both perspectives. So you can use this framework to understand the pain point. You can use this framework when you are validating your the user experience you have defined. And I'm not going to go into details of this framework, but want to highlight that this is something that is very, very helpful. It has helped me a lot as well. So now coming to the second step, which is doing the customer validation of your user experience. So there are multiple methodologies, and I'm not going to go through all the methodologies I've listed here for your information. But the crux here is that whatever methodology you're using to validate the customer experience, make sure that you capture all these A to E things. So which are, make sure that whatever user experience you've defined and how the customers are, when the customers are using it, they find it useful. Are they finding it useful? So answer this. You have to get answer to this question: is it useful? Is it easy to use? And what is the satisfaction level of it? So the way we are solving the problem, is it satisfactory? How satisfactory it is? What do they like? What they dislike? So capture their fears and worries and frustrations. Because going back to our earlier example of Amazon Dash buttons, there could be a worry about, or not a worry, but a frustration that you have to go to that particular area in order to press that button. And that could come out when you're validating that customer experience. And with Alexa, there could be a fear that whatever I'm saying is being listened to. So that could be a fear that will come out. And similarly, like the positives will come out too, and that will help you evaluate what user experience to go ahead with. Also capture any other activities that they do while using your product or feature. So that will also give you insights. So make sure that you capture all these 5 things. Then we come to the third part, which is getting your stakeholder buy-in. So you have your customer problem, you have the user experience, but you need to have alignment from your stakeholders in order to move forward. And in this area, ambiguity exists because of 2 reasons mainly. One is the stakeholders have different understanding of why, or they don't have an understanding of why we want to pursue it. Why, as a PM, you want to march ahead with it. The second thing is that again, the stakeholders have different idea of what successful look like. So people are on different page. So the way to tackle this step is, so I've listed out a bunch of things. So starting with the beginning, the first thing is when you start with this, getting the stakeholder buy-in, do not go into one meeting, a big bang meeting with all the stakeholders and present your idea that you have been working on. Try to understand what are the motivations for each of the stakeholders, what are their goals, where they are coming from, and get that feedback early on in a one-on-one manner, so that you really address their pain points before they raise it in that big bang meeting. So that's one. The second thing is having a crisp doc that outlines a bunch of details that we'll go through. So Amazon highly believes in writing narratives in the document and reviewing it with the team. It might be different for your company depending on the mechanisms that they follow. But I highly recommend this. It could be a different format in your company, but make sure that you include these 7 things, whatever format it may be. So first of all, be very clear about who is the customer. So of course, you're solving a customer pain point, so specify who is the customer. What is the problem and or opportunity that you're solving? What is its size? Because stakeholders are interested in that. Then what is the proposed feature and the benefit from it? And the benefit should be really very simple and clear, free of distractions. Anybody could understand, should be able to understand it. How does it include, how does it tie to your company or product vision and strategy? What are the business goals that this will deliver? And then talk about what will be the new experience, how will it will look like. So don't just tell them, show them. So have your wireframes or mock-ups in there. Be very specific on the success criteria. And this is where you are attempting to bring all the stakeholders on the same page with respect to the success criteria. So highlight that, talk about it often. Then work with your engineering to get a high level understanding of what is the cost that is involved. What is the effort? And then lastly, include your rollout plan and the risks. So once you have all of these, I can guarantee you that you'll have a great conversation with your stakeholders, whether you're going to move forward with it or not. That definitely depends on the on the discussion and how valuable is that idea. But you will have all the data points to be able to have a great discussion if you include all of these things. Again, make sure that your narrative is supported by qualitative and or quantitative data. In fact, make sure that you have both. And also like socialize with the stakeholders to get alignment, be persistent, take the feedback with the open mind, and make sure that you have the answers to the questions that were raised. Use decision-making frameworks to move forward. In Amazon, we have a lot of decision-making frameworks. We have tenets. We also have one-way versus two-way door, one-way door versus two-way door decisions that help us to make progress. Make sure you're not stuck in that place, but you're able to elicit out the feedback from all your stakeholders, either to go forward or pause or whatever it may be. So make sure you're not stuck at one place. So moving to the fourth one here, the fourth stage, which is about defining the right success metrics. And this is really very, very important because all your effort is going to go in vain if you don't have the right success metrics. So let's talk about like some of the pitfalls that lead to ambiguity in this area. So the first one here is that the relation between what you're measuring and your business goals is not captured. So for example, maybe you are a product manager of an app and you see a 50% increase in your app downloads. But is it a good thing or a bad thing? That will not be known until you know how does it tie to your output or your business driver. So are all the app downloads that we are we getting active customers from it? Are they, what is the retention rate of those customers? Because that data will tell us if they're actually moving the needle or not. So if you don't have that relationship, if you're not tracking all those metrics, that will lead to ambiguity. The second example is using an output metric as a success metric. For example, let's say you are a product manager of checkout experience and you launched a new payment method, let's say Google Pay. and you're measuring revenue after you added this new payment method. And that's not going to help because your revenue is impacted by so many other factors. So what you got to do is you got to measure precisely how many times or what is the frequency of usage of the new payment method that you've added. Is it working the way it is expected, like number of failure, and very, very specific to that new feature that you've launched instead of an output metric that is impacted by a lot of uh, other things, and you don't really have a control over it. So you don't have a control over your revenue, but you do have a control on the usage. You can do things to increase usage of this new payment method. So coming to the third one, maybe you're using a metric that is not directly relevant for this feature. So for example, number of views of product detail page after you added a feature to improve the detail page. Because customers would come to the detail page, let's say through search experience. But what you did was you added something on the detail page. So you should specifically be measuring the engagement with that feature instead of how many times the detail page was viewed. So that's that. Then the next one is using a metric that is broad and it masks the impact of the feature. So example, you are measuring the time spent by customer service agent to resolve an issue after you added a feature to improve productivity for a specific category of issue. So you should measure the time spent on that category of issues. And these might seem very simple and, things with common sense, but these are some of the things where like we make mistakes, and that's why these things should we should internalize these things so that we are always measuring the right things. Again, the last one here is not measuring impact on other critical metrics. So you launch something, you're measuring the right metrics to capture the impact of that feature, but what about the impact or a side effect on other things? So let's say you added a call to action, lot of call to actions, but not measure the impact on retention, revenue, and customer satisfaction. So maybe because you added a lot of call to actions, people will engage with that, but they may not like it. They may not like the cluttered experience, and your retention rate might go up. So make sure you're measuring all of those things also. So how do we take care of all of this in one go? So I'm proposing that whenever you're defining a success criteria or a set of success metrics, answer these three questions to make sure you have the right combination. First is, does it measure whether the feature or the product is solving that specific customer problem that you set out to solve in the first place? The second thing is, does it measure how well that feature or product is solving that problem? And the third is, does it measure any unintended effects? And the unintended effects could be positive or negative, but make sure that it is measuring those impact also. So with this, let's move on to the next one, which is about ambiguity during execution. And this is the last stage. We've done all the hard work, and this is where you have to make sure that everything is done right. And for that, let's first look at why ambiguity exists in the first place. So the first reason is you have incomplete requirements, you may have unclear requirements, you may have not stated the assumptions, or you've not stated enough data on why, or you may not have mocks available, and the launch plan is not there. So any of these reasons could lead to ambiguity when your execution train is running on its path. So how do we address it? So these are the steps that you should keep in mind. So make sure that you include these 9 points in your BRD, which is your business requirement document. It may be called by a different name in another company. So the first thing is be specific about who your customer is. And for example, you may be building something for, let's say, some merchants who are selling their products. But the pain point might be relevant to only merchants in a specific country. If that is the case, be very specific about it. Second thing is include the customer journey, the whole flow on how they land in the scenario that you're talking about, how and where exactly they see that pain point. Include your edge cases and negative scenarios. Include assumptions and constraints. So, for example, the feature that you're talking about should only be launched in only 2 or 3 marketplaces. Because of some legal reasons you cannot launch it in other marketplaces. So be specific about it so that there are no surprises at the end which could delay your launch. If there are any constraints, again, maybe there are some privacy laws or some constraint that you have to follow. So make sure that you add that as well. Also show data on how significant is the size of the problem, because your engineering counterpart will be interested in that as well. Talk about the customer and business benefit. So you may already have this when you did your earlier document. So make sure that you include all of this in your requirement document as well. Include the mocks. Again, if it's a small feature, you may not need it. It really depends on your credibility with your engineering team. But if there is a big change, I suggest you to have the mocks, call out the dependencies, and have a launch plan. I've often seen, I've done this myself, where I did the first 8 points and I was like, okay, it's off my back now, and now it's your job to launch this. That's not really true, because you have to have a launch plan, because a lot of times you are experimenting something. So make sure to call it out that this is an experiment. What data is you'll use to decide whether to dial up or not. What is going to be the dial up timeline. If it requires marketing emails to go out, make sure you have alignment with your marketing team. And if things don't go as planned, what is the rollback plan? So make sure that you have that as well. Again, get a sign off from engineering on your BRD. Have a requirement to measure what you launch. And I've seen that in some teams, it is by default, it's a practice to measure whatever you launch. Where that's not the case, make sure you explicitly write it. Do not miss on the localization and internationalization requirements, because often they need additional effort and different sort of skills. So make sure that you have that as part of your plan. So that was about execution. Now we'll come towards the end of this presentation. I just want to recap what we learned. So we started with this product manager journey map, and we looked at each of these journeys, and I suggested some frameworks and tips on how to deal with ambiguity in that specific stage. So in understanding the customer problem, we looked at ambiguity questionnaires, using your metrics, VOCs, surveys, and customer interviews to move from ambiguity to clarity. Then in narrowing down the right user experience, I talked about why ambiguity exists in the first place, and then using empathy map framework to define your user experience and the key points to remember when doing customer validation. Then coming to the stakeholder buy-in, I talked about the vision, the product vision doc, and the things that you need to include in there to get the buy-in. And so on prioritization, we couldn't really touch upon this today, but I highly recommend you to read a blog that I wrote about this. And we did talk about the 5th point, which is the success metrics. So how do we define it? What are the common pitfalls? And the 3 questions that you need to ask yourself to make sure you have the right set of success metrics. And the last one on the execution, we looked at how do we write the effective BRDs, what to include in them, and the importance of launch plan. So with that, we come to the end of this presentation. I hope that you found it useful. I had a great time today. And yeah, if you want to discuss any product topic, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you are looking for tech career advice or resume reviews, mock interviews, again, feel free to book an appointment with me, either on Mentor Me Good or Advisor. I'll be happy to help you. Yeah, and with that, we come to an end. Again, I want to thank Product School for giving me this opportunity. And hope you guys have a good one and take care.